Every time I think about my childhood, I always return to memories of my father, Michael. I clearly remember that fateful morning when I was only 8 years old, a morning that changed everything. My father was a wonderful man, always knowing how to make those around him feel special and loved. It was a Sunday morning like any other, with him in the kitchen preparing my favorite pancakes. He always had a way of making the pancakes special, creating funny shapes that made me giggle endlessly. Mia, my little princess, come help your dad flip these masterpieces, he called, waving the spatula like a magic wand. I remember jumping off the sofa, leaving behind my favorite stuffed animal, and rushing to the kitchen, but that joy didn't last long. The spatula fell to the floor, and my father suddenly clutched his chest, his face twisted in pain. Everything after that became a blur, only the sound of ambulance sirens, hospital corridors, and my mother's cries remained. In the blink of an eye, my father was gone, leaving behind an empty house that felt too big and too quiet. Losing my father was a huge shock to me. Even as a child, I felt the deep void and loss. He wasn't just a loving father, but also a companion who taught me valuable life lessons. I remember the times he patiently showed me how to read star maps in the night sky, explaining the mysteries of the universe with an unforgettable passion. He always encouraged me to explore, discover, and never stop learning. But now, the evenings spent by the window stargazing were just me alone. My mother, Laura, was also engulfed in her own grief. She tried her best to keep everything together, but the absence of my father was a void too great to fill. She spun around in new responsibilities, being both mother and father, while I tried to find balance in a world that had completely changed. In the years that followed, I tried to keep my father's memory alive in my mind. No matter where life took me, I carried his lessons and love with me. They were the motivation that helped me overcome future challenges, the light guiding me when I felt lost. And though he was no longer with me, I knew he was always watching over me, proud of all I had and was striving to achieve. After my father passed away, our lives changed completely. My mother, Laura, met David at a support group for widowed parents. David appeared like a fresh breeze in our lives, with a warm smile and infinite patience. I remember the early days when he came to our house, bringing with him the aroma of freshly baked pastries he made himself, a sweet comfort amid the gloomy days. It wasn't long before my mother and David were married. I remember the wedding taking place on a cool autumn afternoon, with sunlight streaming through the tree branches, creating a magical setting. For me, it was a day full of mixed emotions. Nonetheless, David brought new joy to my mother, and I couldn't help but feel comforted seeing her happy again. But deep down, I still felt something was missing, as if a part of my life had been replaced. Our lives gradually stabilized, and just a year later, Jake was born. The arrival of my little brother changed everything. Suddenly, I was no longer the center of attention, and it left me feeling both lost and curious. Jake was an adorable child, with bright blue eyes and a radiant smile. My mother was completely enamored with him, and it seemed like everything she did revolved around Jake. My mother decided to quit her job to stay home and take care of Jake, saying that his early years were crucial. She had been a dedicated teacher, and I was always proud of her work. But now, with her full attention on Jake, I began to feel like an outsider in my own home. Family dinners became different, with every conversation revolving around Jake and his latest milestones. There was a time I remember asking my mother about my early years, whether they had been important too, but she just smiled, patted my head, and said I was grown up now, that I needed to understand her. That answer didn't satisfy me, but I didn't know what else to do. I only knew I had to seek attention elsewhere. David, the patient and understanding stepfather, became a great source of encouragement for me. He always took the time to listen to me, help me with my challenging homework, and especially cheer me on during my karate practices. David never forgot to remind me that I was important, that I could achieve anything if I tried. Although I knew David couldn't replace my father, he provided me with a sense of safety and love that I had lacked since my father's passing. On afternoons when my mother was busy with Jake, David and I would sit in the garden talking about everything, from the stars in the sky to my future plans. But even with David's support, I couldn't deny the feeling of being abandoned by my mother. Each time she forgot to pack my lunch, or when I had to navigate the challenges of adolescence on my own, I felt more and more pushed out of my mother and Jake's small world. It was a lonely feeling, but it also motivated me to become more independent, to prove that I could take care of myself without relying on anyone else. And from there, I began my journey, seeking a place for myself in this ever-changing world. As time passed, I grew up under the care of David, my beloved stepfather. Although family life wasn't always peaceful, his patience and kindness helped me through difficult times. To me, David wasn't just a stepfather, but a friend and a mentor who supported and encouraged me in every situation. My high school years were filled with extracurricular activities and long evenings of diligent study. While my mother, Laura, devoted all her attention to taking care of Jake, David always paid attention to me. He noticed when I felt abandoned, when I needed someone to listen and share with. It was he who encouraged me to join the karate class, a decision that changed my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. I still remember the first evening I stepped into the karate dojo. I felt nervous and anxious, but David stood by the door, smiling and giving me a thumbs up. "You can do it, Mia," he winked, instilling in me the confidence I needed. Karate not only helped me build physical strength, but also taught me perseverance and a fighting spirit, qualities I needed to face life's challenges. In every practice session, I worked hard, each punch, each kick making me feel stronger. David always sat in the audience, attentively watching and cheering. He became my biggest fan, continuously encouraging and proud each time I earned a new belt. I remember the first time I earned a green belt. David treated me to a special dinner at my favorite restaurant, saying I deserved it for all my efforts. But it wasn't just karate. David also helped me with my studies. On evenings when I was confused by difficult math problems, he patiently sat beside me, explaining each detail in the simplest way possible. He never showed fatigue or frustration, no matter how slow I was to understand. "Patience is key, Mia," he often said, "and you're smarter than you think." Meanwhile, my relationship with my mother grew increasingly distant. She was still lost in Jake's world, not realizing that I also needed attention and affection from her. There were times I wanted to share my small achievements with my mother, but she was always busy or too tired to listen. I learned to accept that, focusing all my energy on studying and self-improvement, and as a result, I became more confident and stronger. David was the one who always reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I could achieve anything if I truly tried. He taught me to stand up for myself, to face difficulties without fear. And although he couldn't replace my lost father, his love and care helped me overcome the pain and lack of affection from my mother. Under David's guidance, I began to realize my own worth, that I could build my life without needing my mother's validation. The valuable lessons from him became a solid foundation that helped me move forward on the challenging road ahead. As I grew older, the conflicts within the family became more apparent, like invisible cracks spreading ever wider. My mother, Laura, was caught up in the whirlwind of caring for Jake, to the point where she almost forgot she had a daughter. Every dinner became a one-sided conversation, where my mother asked Jake about his day, about the little things he had done, while I sat quietly with my plate, like an uninvited guest in my own home. David, my stepfather, did his best to balance out this obvious favoritism. He often reminded my mother, "Laura, you have 2 children, not just one." But my mother would just wave it off, saying Jake needed her more, that he was still too young and vulnerable. Each time I felt a wave of disappointment rising within me. I too had been young, needing love and attention, but those things seemed to have faded into the past. One evening, while the family was having dinner, David decided to speak up about Jake needing to learn independence. "Laura," he began, his voice calm, "we can't keep doing everything for him. Jake needs to learn to take care of himself." My mother immediately reacted, her face showing a hint of annoyance. "What are you implying? That I'm a bad mother?" She put down her fork and knife, her gaze sharp. "No, that's not what I mean, and you know it." David remained calm. "But we have 2 children here, and I think Mia also deserves your attention and affection." I looked up from my plate, my heart pounding. This was the first time anyone had stood up for me like that, and I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. but my mother just sighed and shook her head. Jake needs me more. He's too young to take care of himself. I was young too, I whispered, but no one seemed to hear, or if they did, they chose to ignore it. The conversation ended without resolution, as it always did. David looked at me with sympathetic eyes, as if to say he was sorry he couldn't do more. But I understood he had done his best, and that was enough for me. As time passed, my dissatisfaction grew. I began to feel like a shadow in my own family, a presence my mother seemed not to notice. Each time she forgot to prepare my lunch or didn't attend my karate performances, I felt myself being pushed further away from her embrace. David remained a steadfast support, always encouraging me to pursue my dreams. He often took me to karate classes, staying through every session and cheering me on. His encouragement, warm hugs, and supportive smiles helped me overcome many challenges. But even with David's support, I couldn't deny the feeling of being abandoned by my mother. I learned to be independent, to find my own way without needing my mother's approval. The family conflicts couldn't be erased, but thanks to David, I knew I wasn't alone in this journey. I could stand up for myself, no matter how difficult things got. Time flowed quickly like an unending river, carrying with it both serene memories and hidden pains. The day I graduated from high school, draped in a blue cap and gown, standing on the stage to receive my diploma, was a memorable one. It was a moment I had long awaited, a milestone marking my maturity and independence. There, amid applause and congratulatory words, I saw David, my stepfather, standing in the audience, a proud smile on his face. My mother was also there, but she seemed preoccupied with her phone, probably texting Jake's babysitter. Nevertheless, I felt satisfied because at least she had come. After the ceremony, David pulled me aside, his eyes sparkling with joy. "Mia, you did so well," he said, his voice full of pride. "I've saved up some money for you. You can choose any university you want to attend." My heart overflowed with joy and gratitude. It was a priceless gift, an opportunity to pursue my dreams. But that joy didn't last long when my mother entered, her face showing dissatisfaction. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice icy. "That money should be saved for Jake's future. He'll need it more." David wouldn't budge. "This is my decision, Laura. Mia deserves this." After many nights of contemplation, I decided to choose Marshall University in West Virginia, a place far enough for me to start anew, but not too far that I couldn't return home when needed. The day David helped me move into my new dorm, my mother couldn't come because Jake was anxious about her leaving. I wasn't surprised, but I couldn't help feeling a little sad. College life opened a new chapter full of excitement and challenges. For the first time, I felt truly free, no longer constrained by family obligations. The lectures, discussions with friends, and late-night study sessions became an integral part of my life. I gradually discovered my hidden potential, learning to be independent and take responsibility for myself. Every week, I called home, but most of the conversations were with David. My mother was always busy with Jake, and it seemed she never had time for me. "Jake's going through a tough phase," David explained during one call, his voice sounding tired. "He's hanging out with some bad kids. I've been trying to get him into some after-school programs, but—" "Let me guess," I interrupted. "She said you were being too hard on him." "Exactly. She called me a tyrant for suggesting he needed some discipline." David sighed. "She says I don't understand his sensitivity." I continued to pursue my dreams at university, with a clear goal in mind: to build a life I could be proud of, a life not dominated by family conflicts and pressures. And although I knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, I felt stronger than ever, ready to face any challenges life might throw my way. David had given me that belief, and I would never lose it. The years of college flew by quickly, and before I realized it, I stood at the threshold of adulthood. The day I graduated, the sky was a brilliant blue, and the sunlight seemed to celebrate my accomplishments. I realized I had matured greatly since the first time I left my childhood home. The joy and pride came not only from the degree, but from the journey of independence I had traveled, with all its challenges and valuable lessons. After graduation, I quickly found a job at a leading consulting firm in Charleston, West Virginia. This job not only offered me career development opportunities, but also helped me affirm my self-worth in a professional environment. Each day was a learning experience, from challenging projects to valuable relationships with colleagues. Despite the busy work schedule, I maintained my weekly calls home. Conversations with David continued to be a great source of encouragement, making me feel less alone on my new path. However, my relationship with my mother remained largely unchanged. She was always occupied with Jake, and every conversation seemed to revolve around him. Jake is still finding himself. David often said, his voice a mix of worry and exhaustion. He needs a direction, but your mother won't agree with any of my suggestions. I rarely visited home, but each time I did, I found Jake increasingly distant. Now 20, he still lacked a clear direction for his future. I once knocked on his door, hoping to reconnect as siblings. "Jake, want to grab lunch?" "My treat," I suggested. But the response was only the sound of the video game he was engrossed in. During those visits, I noticed the stark contrast between my life and Jake's. While I was striving to build a career, Jake was immersed in the virtual world, with achievements that existed only on a computer screen. My mother continued to defend him, saying he was just going through a difficult phase. "He's not social," she said when I asked about his lack of employment. "He's very stressed, you know." Those conversations only strengthened my resolve to follow the path I had chosen. My life in Charleston gradually stabilized, and after years of saving, I finally had enough for a down payment on my own apartment. It was a small yet cozy space, located in a quiet neighborhood with lush trees. On the day I received the keys, I couldn't stop smiling, feeling that all my efforts and perseverance had finally paid off. In subsequent conversations with David, he still expressed concern about Jake and my mother's decisions, but I knew I had done all I could, and it was time to focus on my own life. Somehow, I felt that David, the stepfather who always supported me, would be proud to see me finding my own path. The new apartment was not just a place to live, but a symbol of freedom and independence. It reminded me that, despite the challenges and trials in the past, I had overcome and grown. I learned to love myself, proud of what I had achieved without needing anyone's validation. It was a long journey, but one full of meaning and value. Life continued to move forward like a strong river winding through rocks, seeking its own path. In the years I spent building my career in Charleston, I found joy and satisfaction in my work. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't completely forget the memories and responsibilities I had left behind with my family. News of David's death hit me like a bolt of lightning from a clear sky. I received the call from my mother on a quiet Saturday afternoon. "David is gone," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "He had a heart attack while at work." Hearing the news, the entire world collapsed. David, the stepfather who had always been by my side, who had given me confidence in myself, was now gone. I immediately returned home to attend the funeral. A somber atmosphere enveloped the house, now emptier and colder than ever. My mother organized a solemn ceremony, and I could see she was genuinely grieving. But in her eyes, I also saw a vague fear, the fear of facing the future without David to rely on. Jake arrived at the funeral in a not-so-proper outfit. He remained lost in his own world, distant and detached. Seeing him, I could only sigh. Jake still hadn't truly matured, and that worried me more than ever for my mother. After the funeral, I sat with my mother in the living room, which still faintly smelled of incense. "I know David left some savings for you and Jake," I began, trying to find a way to ease her worries. But my mother just shook her head, her face pensive. "That's almost gone," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to do, Mia. Jake still hasn't found a stable job." A wave of emotions surged within me. Over the years, I had done my best to support the family, sending money home monthly to help my mother manage living expenses. But now, with David's financial support depleted, I couldn't help but feel the heavy burden on my shoulders. "I'll help you," I said, knowing that it meant setting aside my own plans. "But you need to encourage Jake to be more independent. He can't keep relying on the family forever." My mother remained silent, her eyes distant as she pondered my words. "I know," she whispered, "but you know, he's my son." I understood that my mother's love for Jake was unconditional, but at the same time, I realized it was time for me to stand up for myself. The decision to stop sending money home wasn't easy, but it was necessary for me to continue building my life without being tied down by financial burdens. Returning to Charleston, I began to focus on what truly mattered: my work, my friends, and my own life. I knew I couldn't continue living in the shadow of my family, but instead, I had to step into the light, seeking happiness and success. Though there were times I missed home, missed my mother and Jake, I kept reminding myself that this was the path I had chosen. I learned to love and care for myself, something I believe David, even though he was no longer with me, always wanted me to do. And that's how I would continue to live, believing I could overcome any difficulties and challenges life might bring. After deciding to stop sending money to my mother and Jake, I felt an unprecedented sense of relief. It was a difficult decision but necessary for me to continue my path without being bound by invisible responsibilities. I began to focus entirely on my work and personal life, seeking new opportunities for self-development. Every morning, I woke up in my cozy little apartment, where every corner bore personal touches. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, creating shimmering patterns on the walls. I stood by the window, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath, feeling the freedom and independence I had achieved. It was a wonderful feeling, as if I were standing atop a mountain, gazing at the panorama of my life unfolding before me. Work at the consulting firm continued to advance. I was assigned more important projects, had opportunities to work with talented colleagues, and learned from them. The challenges at work no longer frightened me. Instead, they became the motivation for me to strive, to prove that I could accomplish more than others thought. Despite being busy, I made time for myself, participating in yoga and painting classes. The moments spent in gentle yoga poses, or letting my imagination soar across colorful canvases, helped me find balance and peace of mind. I realized that life wasn't just about work and responsibilities, but also about enjoying and taking care of oneself. Occasionally, on quiet evenings, I sat by the window, sipping a hot cup of tea and reflecting on what I had been through. Images of David appeared in my mind, with his warm smile and eyes always full of pride. I knew that even though he was no longer with me, his advice and love remained an invaluable encouragement, helping me confidently move forward. One day, while tidying up the apartment, I found a letter from David that I had carefully kept in a drawer. His scrawled handwriting, written on the day I graduated from college, touched my heart. Mia, my daughter, always remember that you can achieve anything if you put your heart and soul into it. Never give up on your dreams. Those words were like a lighthouse guiding me through difficult times. Spring arrived, bringing gentle breezes and the sweet scent of flowers. I decided to host a small party at my apartment, inviting close friends to share joy and life stories. In the cozy atmosphere of the evening, I felt genuine friendship and connection, things I always cherished and was grateful for. My life, though with unfillable voids, continued to move forward with faith and hope. I learned to accept the past and cherish the present, knowing I had traveled a long way to reach this place. And no matter how uncertain the future might be, I would always keep faith in myself, in my ability to overcome any challenges. That's how I would live, free and strong, like a sail full of wind on the vast sea. Mia's story serves as a profound reminder of the importance of self-reliance and confidence in oneself. In today's world, we often face pressures from family and society, but it's crucial to set boundaries and make our own path. From Mia's journey, we can learn the lesson of not letting others' expectations dictate our lives. Instead, we should listen to ourselves to determine what truly matters. Additionally, the story highlights the value of seeking and building positive relationships. David, as a supportive and encouraging figure, helped Mia grow and find her inner strength. In our current lives, having good friends, mentors, or companions can help us overcome challenges and achieve our goals. Lastly, always make time to care for yourself, both physically and mentally, because only when we are healthy and content with ourselves can we face the challenges life brings.